When you are drawing your own shapes in GIMP, it's very, very helpful to know exactly how these controls work when it comes to your stroke style. So this is just a basic star that I've drawn in Inkscape, which was very, very easy to do. And then I just used this fill section to give it a gradient fill, and a stroke paint, I gave it this kind of gold color. I actually used this palette at the bottom, and that's all very easy. Now when it comes to stroke style, you have a lot of options, and so if I just zoom right into this star so that we can see these corner pieces really nicely. In fact, we can actually zoom in even more. And what I'm going to do to start off with is I'm going to use this width value to actually increase the width of this stroke. So we could put this right up to something like, maybe something like 5. So that's the first thing you can do. You can increase the width of your stroke with this option. And just to better show the way we're working, if you go back to stroke point, I'm actually going to decrease the opacity of that stroke. And what that shows you is that this stroke is actually sitting midway over the edge of this actual path. So half the stroke is on the inside, half is on the outside. And this little corner point here is actually the very end of this path. And where that comes into play is when you have these join options. Join determines exactly how a corner point is going to look. So here we have this corner point where these two sides are joining. And right now it's set to join, and we can see from this icon that it makes a nice sharp corner, and that's what we have here. But you need to use the meter limit. And the meter limit tells Inkscape how far from this point, the very edge of the path, it's allowed to keep going out in order to join these up. And just to give you an idea, if I set this down to 0, you can see that this corner that was nice and sharp is now suddenly getting cut off. And that's because Inkscape actually isn't being allowed any space to keep drawing these edges out to make a nice sharp edge. And if we slowly start increasing this value, you'll see only once we get to something like 3.7, it now has enough space in which to finish off this corner, and so that's exactly what it does. The second option you have is rounded, and rounded doesn't have any other values associated with it. All it's going to do is just round off these corners, and that can actually look really nice in a lot of different situations. The last option you have is bevel, and bevel just chops off the edge. So a bevel actually is exactly the same as meter, as join set to a meter limit of 0. So to be honest, bevel really isn't very useful. It looks pretty terrible, and you can get the same effect with the join with a 0 meter anyway. But I'm going to set that back up to something like 5. When it comes to something like an open path, so if for example I just take the pen tool and I just draw one point and then another point and then just right click to end that path there, if we zoom in on this path, we have a number of options here as well. So if we get our select tool and select this path, we get a butt cap, which just chops everything off. You get a rounded edge, which gives you this nice rounded effect. And then square cap is exactly the same as butt cap, but it's just a little bit longer. So most often I find that rounded caps for your paths are the best way to go. You can change the style of the strokes, and this applies to open or closed paths. So for example, you can create some kind of like dotted effect. And then you can also use these markers. So an end marker is going to place any one of these icons on the end of your path. So for example, we have this arrowhead, and that gives you a nice arrow. You can't really customize these, and they're always going to come out black, but you could always change the color of that in something like GIMP. You can try smaller arrows, and there's tons and tons that you can experiment with. So those are just the basics of how to deal with your corners when you're drawing your own shapes and lines. It's very helpful to know how to do that because it can really make a big difference. For example, this star, we really want it to have nice sharp corners, and so it's important to know how to use this join and meter limit.